Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Charles and Howie, who are the co-chairs of the Education Committee, and also to the Archives Project, which connected us with Daniel, who's here this evening. So this is an amazing exhibit. I'll tell you, I saw this when it was at Cooper Union. And one of the first things I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be incredible if we could bring this here to Penn South, given our rich history and how it connects. And one of the things that we were talking about with Daniel when we first came in is the importance of recognizing and cherishing our history. And this is a gift that, as we learn about it, it enriches our experiences here at Penn South, and it also instills in us what the remarkable responsibility that we have to allow the next generation of cooperators to be able to have this experience, what that means in terms of not only from financial stability, in terms of having safe access to housing, how to build community, and how to develop and cherish the community that you live in. And all three of those things are really important because they're also tied into the Rochdale principles. So on that note, thank you so much for being here, Daniel. I'm going to hand it over to you this evening. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dan Roach. I'm the news editor at the Architects newspaper, and I teach at the News School. I just want to say thank you to Tracy, Trudy, Gary, Amber, the folks at Penn South for having me. It's really an honor to be able to speak in this room tonight. Thank you, Charles. Thanks. So I'm going to present tonight my research that I've been doing with a friend and collaborator, Zara Pfeiffer, who's a photographer based in Vienna. And for the past 3 years, Zara and I have been researching an architect named Herman Jessor, who designed Penn South, along with, in total, 40,000 units of cooperative housing in New York City. And so, as Amber mentioned, we just finished an exhibition at Cooper Union that displayed Zara's photographs. Zara and I spoke at Cooper, and now we're working on a book together that is going to tell the cumulative history of the cooperative living movement in New York City, all the way from Abraham Kazin through the United Housing Foundation and the story of Herman Jessor as well. So I'm really so happy to be here. So the presentation is split up into 2 parts. The first part is going to be overview of Zara's photography. Zara not only photographs cooperative housing in New York City, but also Vienna, Austria. So just to give you a sense of her artistic overview, the photographs are quite beautiful. The second half of the presentation will be my research as a historian into the life and career of Herman Jessor. So let's get into it. So this is the architect who designed Penn South. Who here has heard of Herman Jessor? Okay, about half, good. That's great. So yeah, Herman was born in 1894. He died in 1990. I'll talk a little bit about his own story immigrating to the United States and where he grew up, but these quotes for me really encapsulate who Herman was as a human being. In 1976, Herman Jessor was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by his alma mater, Cooper Union. Cooper Union credited Herman by saying that he designed housing for more New Yorkers than any other architect. Now, if we flash forward to 2024, a London critic named Owen Hatherley recently said that Herman Jessor is the most important radical architect you've never heard of. So to me, it's just fascinating how in a span of 60 years you can go from this prolific builder to somebody that history, for me, it seems, has forgotten. And so now I'm going to just really quickly show you the beautiful photographs that Zara does of cooperative housing. So to the left is a place called Alt Erla in Vienna, Austria. It's by an architect named Harry Gluck. It was completed in 1976, around the same time as Co-op City. Similar idea, towers in the park, lots of green space, wonderful places to live. And Co-op City, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, in the Bronx. Zara and I spent the last 2 years photographing Co-op City and other places like Penn South. So this is what Alt Erla looks like from an elevated perspective. Beautiful towers. There's lots of greenery. Basically the same idea as Co-op City, except the towers sort of have this cascading profile. This just to give you a sense of the greenery. It's really quite wonderful. And so a very similar history behind Alt Erla as well as Penn South. It was built by trade unions, still predominantly houses, folks in the trades. There's a lot of pride and identity in this place, just like Penn South. This is what it looks like in section. So just like at Penn South and spaces like we're in right now, Alt Erla has lots of amenities and community spaces in the ground level. So here there's a place that builds, model airplanes. There's a swimming pool on the roof. Does Penn South have a swimming pool? Maybe we can think about it. And so that brings us to Co-op City. So Zara and I met 3 years ago, and the first day that we ever met each other in person, we had been talking, over the phone about how we wanted to work together, and we met up north in the Bronx at Co-op City, and we spent the day there together just walking around, photographing, and talking to people. So a little bit about Co-op City. It is the world's largest cooperative housing estate. 50,000 people live there. If it was its own independent city, it would be the 10th largest city in the state of New York. It has its own zip code, its own newspaper. It's a fabulous place. Lots of green space. So yeah, we spent a lot of time interviewing residents. This is Noel Ellison. He's the general manager, now retired, of Co-op City. But he would be the one to implement, sweeping renovations across the place. But his unofficial nickname was the mayor of Co-op City, so everybody knows Noel. This is East River Houses. So the United Housing Foundation, Abraham Kazin, Herman Jessor built up much of Grand Street in the Lower East Side. Amalgamated Dwellings, a much earlier project. Who knows Liz? Yeah. So this is a. Yep. This is of Penn South. Is Liz here today? Yeah. This is a lobby that you all know. This is Amber's daughter. Correct? Yeah. I just learned that tonight, so it's a beautiful photograph. So this is the ceramics studio, of course. Yeah. The garden. Tracy. Yep. This is Tracy. Yep. And John. Yep, this is the art studio. So this is in the Bronx, back in the Bronx, amalgamated houses. So it's fascinating to me to compare Penn South with this place. Architecturally, on the outside they look different, but really the same ideas that got them built. More shared space. This is Shalom Aleichem houses.
Shalom Aleichem,
Yep. Which we mentioned.
Also in the Bronx.
Also in the Bronx. This is Rochdale Village, which before the construction of Co-op City was the world's largest cooperative housing estate. Today it's the country's largest African American majority co-op. So it's a wonderful, wonderful communities there. The ballroom. Starrett City. Warbass houses in Coney Island, another Jessor project. So that brings us to part 2 of this presentation. And this is, I'm really excited again to be talking about Herman in this space. Over the course of the next 30, 40 minutes, I'm going to tell you about who Herman Jessor was. I'll talk about the extent to which he shaped New York City as we know it today. I'm going to talk about why I think it's really important that we talk about him right now. In case you hadn't noticed, New York City is really expensive. Rent prices, I'm a renter. Rent prices are astronomical. Home ownership has become, a forlorn thing that a lot of people just can't even imagine doing now. The cost of living has not kept up with real wages. You know, the median one-bedroom rental price in New York City today is $4,300. If you make minimum wage, which is $1,650, you cannot afford that. Nor can you afford the median home price at $782,000. So something's got to change. So a little bit about me as a journalist. I write a lot about housing, not only cooperative housing, but public housing. Is everybody following what's happening at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea houses down the street? So I've been reporting on this issue for years now. I've been working with a lot of folks at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea who are really, really angry about what Related is doing. That's an existential threat to the neighborhood. And so I met Gary at a protest there a few years ago, I believe. So it was when I was reporting on Fulton and Elliott Chelsea houses, even before I was researching Herman Jessor, is when I became interested in Penn South, because I noticed a lot of folks at Penn South were going to the protests, which I think is a beautiful example of solidarity for folks in the neighborhood. So I go to a lot of the protests as well. So a recent article that I just wrote, I interviewed multiple mayoral candidates running for trying to become the next mayor of New York City. I interviewed Scott Stringer, Zoran Mamdani, Brad Lander, Zellner Myrie, Jessica Ramos, and I asked them, what's your plan to fix the housing crisis? And so everybody has different ideas. One thing that I think is really important to iterate, there's a city council member who represents the Lower East Side in Chinatown, Christopher Marte, who told me, New York City already has enough market rate housing, it's lacking in social housing. This is something I agree with. And so when I interviewed Zoran Mamdani, who represents Astoria, Queens, Zoran told me, what makes our campaign distinct is that we believe there is a clear and critical role for the public sector to play in constructing homes across New York City. And that role will deliver 200,000 permanently affordable, union-built, rent-stabilized homes to New Yorkers who currently cannot afford to find anywhere to live on the market. So another development that I follow as a journalist, lawmakers have proposed something they call the Social Housing Development Authority, which would allocate funding from the state to go towards cooperative housing and public housing and land trusts. So the reason that I'm talking about this right now is that for the first time in a very long time in this country, the government is talking about getting back into the housing industry again. And so, yeah, I think to rectify the affordability crisis we have, I do believe that it's going to take action from trade unions, from state actors to fix this thing. And so this is the sort of thesis that I have as a historian. The affordability crisis is not a game of supply and demand. That's what neoliberal economists would have you believe. Systemic problems require systemic solutions the free market cannot and will not fix. Thus is the logic of capitalism. So that brings us to Herman. What did Herman Jessor do over the course of his life? He did a lot. Today in New York City, now this number includes market rate and affordable limited equity cooperative units, but today in New York there's a total of 357,905 units of cooperative housing. Over the course of a 60-year career, Herman built 40,000 of those. That's 11% of New York City's total supply of cooperative housing. Truly remarkable. So this is a list of his largest projects in the Bronx. He built Sholem Aleichem houses, United Workers Association houses, otherwise known as the Coops, which there was a film screening a few weeks ago here about the Coops. It was lovely. With the United Housing Foundation and Abraham Kazin, he built amalgamated cooperative houses and Co-op City, his largest work. In Manhattan on Grand Street, he built the amalgamated dwellings. He built the Sidney Hillman houses with the AFL-CIO, the East River houses, and Seward Park houses, and Penn South. And in Brooklyn, he built the amalgamated Warbass houses in Coney Island and Twin Pines Start City, which there's a whole lecture to be had in that one. the United Housing Foundation started that project, but then it went bankrupt, and then Fred Trump bought the place and then took credit for it. Yeah. It's really fascinating to compare. So Abraham Kazin and Fred Trump were arch rivals, and the way that they organized and the rules that Kazin's buildings were set up on the Rochdale principles. They're about social justice and equity. Fred Trump, shocker, but did not espouse those values. So his co-ops were much more authoritarian, and you could even call them fascist, in my opinion. Yeah. And in Queens, he built Chester Tower and Rochdale Village. So this is just a map to show how these places are distributed around New York City, all the way from the North Bronx to deep Queens, Coney Island. There's a cluster in the Lower East Side and at Penn South. So really just, the last 2 years I've been going to all of these places and talking to people there. And it's really, a wonderful way to see New York City. And the reason that I think this map is really important is because a lot of people, whenever I go to these places, I was at Amalgamated Dwellings a few weeks ago, and I was talking to a woman who works there. And we were taking photographs, and she said, "Oh, what are you photographing?" And I said, "You're working on this project about Herman Jessor." And she said, "Oh, what else did he build?" And I said, "Co-op City." And she said, "I live in Co-op City." She said, "I had no idea that the same architect made all of these places." And so I think right now what I'm really interested in is raising awareness about not only this great architect, but the cooperative living movement and the forces that got this place built. So this is a diagram that explains how the early co-ops were financed before World War II. So there were two really major instruments that people like Abraham Kazin relied upon in the Garment Workers Union. One was the 1926 Limited Dividend Law that was passed by Governor Al Smith. That was the first time in New York State history where capital was unlocked from the state coffers that could go towards housing. When FDR took office as president, the 1936 Housing Act by Catherine Bauer was largely modeled off of Smith's work as governor of New York. And the second thing was private loans from life insurance companies. So the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company at that time was investing in housing. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company built Parkchester in the Bronx. It built what we now call Stuytown, so a lot of similar co-ops. And so what would happen is if you were a member of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union or the United Workers Association or the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, you could apply for a loan from the state or from a life insurance company that you would then pay back in the form of bonds to build your cooperatives. So that's what happened at Shalom Aleichem houses. That was financed with a loan from the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. United Workers Association houses, or the COOPs, that was funded from state resources. But then after World War II, there were other channels that unlocked capital for housing. So one of them being the 1949 Housing Act, and the other one being the 1955 Mitchell-Lama Housing Program. And so the 1949 Housing Act would channel federal funding towards housing, while the Mitchell-Lama Housing Program unlocked funding from the state of New York. But one thing that happened was after World War II, the United Housing Foundation was built. Has everybody heard of the United Housing Foundation? No? So the United Housing Foundation was founded by Abraham Kazin, who was the chief accountant of this grand operation. The United Housing Foundation was a coalition of 62 trade unions, clothing workers unions, auto workers unions, lots of different unions. And Kazin was the chief accountant that determined how they should spend all of their money. He was a mastermind. He's considered the pioneer of cooperative living in the United States. And so after World War II, the trade unions got together, joined forces, and they built a massive amount of housing using federal funds and state funds. And so the International Ladies Garment Workers Union was an affiliate, a subsidiary of the UHF, and that's inevitably what got Penn South built. So that brings us again to Herman. Herman Jessor, for me, is interesting on so many different levels. Typically, when people talk about cooperative housing in New York City, they talk a lot about Kazin, they talk a lot about the UHF, but the architect really hasn't been credited. And I think he should be, because he's a brilliant man. In 1968, Herman said, "The final solution to housing for the masses is that it be a government function such as streets, highways, sewers, water, subways, post offices, etc. It is too vital for the needs of the people to be subject to the profit motive." In 1991, Herman's last boss from the UHF called him an unrepentant commie. So a little bit about me as a journalist. I write a lot about union efforts in the construction trades and architecture today. Another reason that I think that Herman is a remarkable architect is that his office paid dues to the AFL-CIO. So there's there are currently 2 architecture offices in the United States today that are union-backed. There's been so much work to dissipate the labor movement in architecture, but Herman was a champion of it, and so he should be credited. So, who was Herman Jessor? Herman Jessor was not born Herman Jessor. His birth name was Herman Jessor. He was born in 1894 in a shtetl in modern-day Belarus called Gomel. Gomel is very close to the shtetl that my family comes from. We're from a place in Belarus called Shklov. My family, very similar politics and the story of migration. My family immigrated from Belarus to the Bronx around the same time that Herman did. I have a great-grandfather, Philip Raskin, who was a very prolific Yiddish poet. They were all socialists, still socialists. But so for me, when I talk about Herman's history, I also feel like I'm learning more about my own family history. So Herman Jessor immigrated to the United States when he was about 10. When he was in middle school, his teacher helped him Americanize his name to Jessor, like a lot of Jews did at the time. My family did the same thing. And when Herman was enrolled at Stuyvesant High School, he did something illegal. He got into the engineering program at Cooper Union. And so when Herman Jessor was a high school student, he'd be going to Stuyvesant during the day, and at night he'd go to Cooper. And so this kid graduated with an engineering degree from probably the best engineering school in the country when he was 18. And he immediately hit the ground running. And just to give you a sense of what Cooper Union and the Lower East Side was like in 1917, I don't think I have to, I think a lot of people here know what the Lower East Side was like then, how radical it was. In 1917, when Herman Jessor graduated from Cooper, Leon Trotsky spoke at the Great Hall. So, you know, I can't prove that Herman was in the audience that night, but I have a feeling he knew who Leon Trotsky was. And so after he graduated from Cooper Union, he went to work for an office called Springsteen and Goldhammer. And the first project that he worked on was, this is the Yiddish word for cooperative. It's in the Bronx. And it was completed in 1926. And Dana Kessler in the foreword said that the goal of this cooperative was to establish a just and close-knit socialist community. And they did that, and they were punished for it. During the first Red Scare, the FBI used to sit in their cars across the street, taking notes on whoever came and went. This is the second major project Herman worked on. He was not the chief architect, he was the chief draftsman. But he worked on the United Workers Association houses in the Bronx. You can see the hammer and sickle above the doorway. But what's fascinating to me about this building is many things. When Herman was designing this space, he was a member of the Communist Party. About 90% of the people who lived in this place were members of the Communist Party. And the way they went about designing the interior layouts, Herman worked with Herman literally designed interior layouts with every single working mother that lived in this place. You had the first kindergarten in New York City was here, because the goal was to redistribute, to abolish, unpaid domestic labor, and communize that. So that's what happened. There was a library with books in Yiddish, in Russian, and English. There were busts of Lenin. The stories I've heard during the Spanish Civil War, the kids from the building would sell cigarettes on the corner to send money to the anti-fascists. Sonia Goldstein grew up here. Paul Robeson was known to frequent here. W.E.B. Du Bois, Emma Goldman. This is a legendary, legendary place. And so I think these quotes get to the idea of what the coups were all about. In a left-wing newspaper in Yiddish in 1925, there was an advertisement that was trying to get people to move there. They said, "We want to build a fortress for the working class against its enemies." And Steve Payne of the Bronx Historical Society much later said, "The coups were one of the most remarkable moments of intentional, militant, interracial solidarity in the borough and probably in all of New York City." And Sonia spoke about that a few weeks ago when she was here, about how when Paul Robeson was scheduled to speak and to perform somewhere upstate, there were Peaksville. Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot of folks from the coups went there to defend him, basically. So yeah, these were some of the people that hung out in the coups. W.E.B. Du Bois, Emma Goldman, Paul Robeson, oddly Queen Mother Moore. Pete Seeger used to do free concerts there for kids. Just an incredible, incredible place. Vivian Gornick's wonderful book, The Romance of American Communism, has a chapter about the coups. In 1974, Vivian Gornick said, "There are a few thousand people wandering around America today who became communists because they were raised in the cooperative houses on Allerton Avenue in the Bronx, better known to all who knew of their existence as the coups." The coups were so effective at politically organizing before World War II, so that the reason that the Bronx's political map is the way that it is today is because of the coups. So what eventually happened was, so the coups are split between 4 buildings divided by Britton Street. The folks who lived in the coups were so effective at organizing that socialists started to get elected into office. The state of New York did not like that. So what they did was gerrymandering. So they redrew the political map, the voting map of New York, to break up the socialist vote down Britton Street. So that's why the Bronx's voting map is the way that it is today. It's the coups are divided. So that was to dissipate the burgeoning labor movement that the coups were fueling.
What year was that?
That was sometime in the 1930s. Yeah.
That's when I was born.
So that's why we have the 6th Assembly District draws the line at Britton Street. And so another really amazing project that Springsteen and Gold, Hammer and Jessor worked on was the amalgamated dwellings in the Lower East Side. The architecture itself and the politics behind it were based off of a very famous housing estate in Vienna, Austria, known as Karl Marxhof. The arches, a lot of the architectural motifs that we see were taken from Karl Marxhof in Vienna by Karl N. And so that, before I talk about Penn South, so during the Great Depression, Herman was out of work, Springsteen and Goldhammer was out of work, and Herman he had 2 nephews that he was looking out for. And as a member of the Communist Party, he went to the party headquarters, which were really close to here. And he had renovated their office space when he was really young, just out of school. And he asked them, he said, "Do you have any work? I'm out of work." And they said, "No, we don't have work for you, but we have this farm out in eastern Pennsylvania, and we just lost our farmer. Do you know anything about agriculture?" Herman had never farmed a day in his life, as far as I know. But he said, of course I do. I'm good with the shovel and a plow. And so he moved out to eastern Pennsylvania near Quakertown, and that's where he spent the Great Depression. And I'm still in touch with his now 100-year-old nephew, Richard Jessor, who vividly remembers being on the farm with Herman. And the reason I tell that story, I think it gives you a sense of the kind of guy he was. I work in architecture. I'm constantly being reminded of there's so many pompous people, arrogant people. The stories I hear about Herman, he was the opposite of that. He was a really good guy, and he cared about his friends and family. So after World War II, the United Housing Foundation formalizes all of this capital, gets opened up at the federal and city level, and Herman Jessor and Abraham Kazin hit the ground running. Together with the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, they got Penn South built, where we are now, home to the legendary civil rights activist Bayard Rustin. Today, while he was designing Penn South, he was also working on Rochdale Village in Queens, which is today the world's largest black majority housing cooperative. To the right, some of the early folks who were living there. Again, another thing that I should have said too about the coops was that, and the amalgamated dwellings and the houses.
I lived there.
Oh, wow.
Before I moved here.
At the coops.
At the
Excuse me, can you
amalgamated
hold the comment still afterwards?
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Well, these places were some of the first racially integrated places in the entire country.
1929.
Yeah. So just really, not only were there amazing feminist practices happening there to abolish unpaid domestic labor, but also integration. And we see that, play out again and again at these co-ops. And so Herman's his largest project was Co-op City in the North Bronx. It is today the world's largest housing cooperative. 50,000 people live there. It has its own newspaper. I've been to the newsroom. It's really cool. It has its own zip code. A lot of the folks who moved there were really important in the anti-war movement. The photo we see to the right. So that brings us almost to the end of the presentation. But again, so who was Herman Jessor? Why don't we know that much about him? When he finished Co-op City, he was not very appreciated for his work. A very influential critic named Saibal Mahalinaji said that his buildings had deadly anti-urbanism. So whatever that means, Saibal here is talking about the architecture of Penn South. So anybody think it's deadly urbanism? I don't either. Ada Louise Huxtable of the New York Times said that it was uninspired architectural design. I disagree with that as well. Jane Jacobs said that a co-op like this would fail economically if it had competition. So for me, that's a very classist thing to say. Oh, Jane Jacobs said that she didn't like cooperative supermarkets because she always said, in quote, the service was unfriendly, end quote. So this is a comment that just kind of gives you a sense of the zeitgeist architecturally towards the 1970s. A group of Yale architecture students at that time said, Co-op City was an example of the bleak, inhuman, uninhabitable masses of stone, the products of a society so distorted in its values that it can offer nothing but ugliness to its less fortunate members. They should go back to Yale. And so when I interviewed Richard Jessor, who's now 100, this is Richard to the left, that's Herman in the middle, and that's Howie, Richard's brother, to the right. When I interviewed Richard, this is what he told me. He said his critics never really got it right, and he was really hurt by what so many people said. They always overlooked his radical social mission, that of providing good living spaces for working people and good living conditions they couldn't get anywhere else in New York. And this is from the Jessor Family Archive. After Herman won his 1976 Lifetime Achievement Award after receiving so much flack from the New York Times, from Jane Jacobs, from Saibal Mahalli Naji, he wrote to his nephew Richard, "Wow, someone out there likes me." That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there are questions, so please raise your hand, we'll call on you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I really love the interior of Penn South. The apartments are really beautiful.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have the gorgeous landscape
Oh, yeah.
that we have here, the buildings themselves from the outside are really very utilitarian.
Right.
And was that because to save money, or there's, I think the buildings in Austria were better designed on the outside anyway, but I do appreciate the apartments here are really beautiful, and I've lived here since I was 17 years old. I'm an original, so I really have always loved living at Penn South, and I just wish that the exterior there had been more consideration done to the outside of the building.
That's a great question. So you saw this stark difference between the pre-war and post-war buildings, right? The early ones had much more ornament. So after World War II, economic constraints took over, and there was much more demand. And so they had to do away with the ornamentation. But Herman, his primary concern, he always said, was that I design from the inside out. What he cares about is creating spacious units, good kitchens, and exterior appearances were sort of secondary. But the nice thing about the architecture of these buildings are the cross breezes that they have. And so, yeah, the earlier, I think it's another, Herman grew up in the tenements of the Lower East Side. And so the architecture he knew as a child and in Belarus, dark, cramped. His foremost concern was not aesthetics, but it was about nice interior, spacious units. So, but I completely, I agree. There's, but the landscaping here I think is just remarkable as well. So yeah.
Young man, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess because that's just what made South this building's orientation. If you look at it and then look at the building surrounding it, it's called for a much more spacious layout. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this type of architecture is what's called towers in the park. So before World War II, the way that an architect would have gone about solving a housing problem is that you have your building and it wraps around the whole perimeter of the site. That doesn't give you a lot of green space on the ground plane, although it does give you a shorter building. But the thing about this architecture was that if you make the buildings taller and you spread them out throughout the campus instead of having sort of one block, you can have lots of green space on the ground. And the buildings were also oriented to maximize sunlight. So lots of sunlight. It was sunlight and green space. That's a great question. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Now, I think the political affiliation with the political affiliation of that government with some communist countries both a little bit of the aesthetics of the communist countries.
Yeah.
It's all over. They cannot say it's an exception, but they show it's really aesthetics, very pleasing, but not here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Can you repeat that, please? The question.
the question was about how the aesthetics of Herman's co-ops were inspired by socialist countries. I think that's true. But I also think that they're really the aesthetics of the post-war buildings were really defined by economic constraints. They had a lot of people in the trades that they needed to house, and they kind of had to make some decisions. Do we have, interesting architecture? Can we fit another 20 families inside this campus? And they always went for housing more people. And so that's why, it's brick, it's utilitarian, but that was the thinking behind it.
Yes,
Charles, and how please, this is Charles.
one is, sorry,
You haven't chosen anyone from this side.
All right, I'll go to the side, hold on. So on this side, go ahead, please.
I was wondering if you could speak a little to what was required to build. I know they had to destroy neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be possible today, but what made it possible to sort of basically destroy all the neighborhoods that were here before? How did that happen and what was the process?
So that was made possible by Title I of the 1949 Housing Act. And that's a really important question. So what the 1949 Housing Act allowed for, and that this also speaks to why these buildings are so large. The idea was to get rid of landlord-owned slums and replace them with co-ops. And what would happen on Grand Street was that, and Amalgamated was that, say you have this block of tenements where 1,000 people live.
Where I live.
At
I lived
Amalgamated.
on a little.
But so the idea was that, okay, we're going to get rid of the landlord-owned tenements and we're going to build enough spaces for 3,000 people. And so the people who were affected by or living in these tenements, they were rehoused on Grand Street. And the way that was economically viable was because the rule of thumb was to always build 2/3 more units than there were on the site then.
Really?
That was the idea, but it was different all over the city. Penn South is a different story.
Yeah.
And what happened here? Sorry.
Well, does that answer your question? I'll go to the side then. You
No, what happened here? We wanted to know what happened here.
So
go back and forth between the sides.
Yeah, she asked a follow-up.
Oh, you have a follow-up, I'm sorry, go ahead.
what happened here? So the filmmakers
Go ahead.
behind the cooperators are the producers are with us here tonight, and do you want to talk about?
About the fact that people were displaced.
Yeah.
I mean, people who lived here were displaced. And, many of them could not afford to move here. And that's a reality of Penn South.
Yeah.
And it's a reality, I think, of a lot of places in Robert Moses, we know, had a lot to do with the destruction of neighborhoods. To build roads, he didn't have the same ideology as Jessor, obviously, but his, the destruction of neighborhoods.
Okay, so to answer, yes, okay. Go ahead, Iris, you had, actually it was, okay, then we'll go over here, Kim.
I grew up in a place called Northridge, and across the street was Southridge, and they were in Jackson Heights, Queens. And when I lived there, and I knew Manhattan, and I knew the area here, it always surprised me how similar those buildings were. But I'm not hearing that there was any connection. Was there? I mean, they were so similar in the composition of the apartments and the grassy areas they were in.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that I had a teacher who was owning some of the land when it was destroyed, and it was hard land. So
I don't know who the architects were of Southbridge, but that was the general consensus about how that architecture should look at that time. It's that was as in planning. Yeah, that was the sort of ideal. But it worked.
Anybody on this side? Yes, go ahead.
I grew up on the Lower East Side. I was born 1932. We had the bathtub in the kitchen, and it was like on feet. If you and to family, you were in the kitchen. We hung a sheet around the bathtub and took a bath. The toilet was in the hall, and it was really very hard living there. And he amalgamated the houses on Grand Street. They were like a palace. I thought, and they had a roof garden. I had friends that lived there that went to school with me. And these buildings are just wonderful.
Great, well, thank you.
The idea was to build a palace. You're absolutely right.
It was like a palace
Yeah.
to me, and I went up on the roof,
Yeah.
and they had beautiful goldfish.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so beautiful.
yeah, thank you for the, thank you. That's
Yeah. Thank you.
very good. Sharon, you had your thing yet?
Good.
Hi, thank you so much. It really wasn't enough. I was writing a book
Yes.
or giving a lecture series on this.
I'm writing a book. So
And
yeah.
a lot of it was very familiar. I'm also from school, I'm sure you could tell by my accent.
Yeah.
I lived across the street from Sholomoreka.
Okay.
So I've been in those apartments, and I just by recently in there, I heard about the kindergarten and the grocery store, and they're not necessarily doing that, but they really brought things up to scale there.
That's great.
Also, Core City, and I'm wondering if it's just an isolated case. The buildings, nothing was torn down there. That was a swamp.
That was an amusement park.
And then
Yeah.
Freedom.
Freedom Land. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then, it outlived its attraction, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and I've been also in those apartments, which was very big. And I hope nobody minds me saying this, but I remember when Co-op City opened, and, it was an escape for many Jewish families, to sort of move up to this, from the 5-floor walk-up tenements to this luxury space.
From the Grand Concourse. Yeah. That's where my family lived.
Yeah.
Concourse.
Big,
Yeah.
big demographic changes
Yeah.
to that,
Yeah.
with Cork City. Yes, go ahead. Yes, Beth, yes.
Hi. Pretty.
I see it.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, Joe. So there's the architecture, right? And then there's the construction. I'm curious as to how the Jessors, in the construction, how is the actual outcomes of those buildings, like construction-wise, actually match like what you specified? Like, so I'm curious about the construction. Elza, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, so there's two things I can say about that. One of the reasons the United Housing Foundation was so effective was that the UHF, because they were comprised of people in the trades, they were their own general contractor and their own architect, and so that reduced a lot of overhead costs. That made them really quick and efficient, and they saved money that way. Co-op City is really interesting to think about in relation to this question because while it was getting built, the Vietnam War was happening. And the war drove up inflation and it drove up construction costs. And so when the rent strike happens, and it looks like Co-op City might not get built because of the war and inflation, construction costs skyrocket, and that's why people went on strike because the payments that they were making every month kept going up and up and up because that was the only way they could pay back the bonds to the state. But so yeah, the buildings architecturally, to try to answer your question, they were so constrained by economic forces because this wasn't developer money. They were relying on the pension funds and the state. And if the economy, there's fluxes in the economy, that had a huge impact on the architecture. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of does, because we live here, obviously, and there's something that great. I did fun where we live, and we sometimes wonder, God, I wish they had thought of a second bathroom in a 3-bedroom.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think all those sort of things, like what works, I'm sure, yeah, architects always have a vision, but when you come to the economics and the construction, shopper mind is always have to be made. I wondered what was, what actually happened and how these things were actually built.
Yeah.
But you don't have to answer that, I'm sure.
No, it's a great question.
That's a whole other inquiry, right?
Next
Susan?
question, yes?
Yeah. Hi, I wonder whether
Bruce, I'm sorry.
Eminent domain played a role in the land acquisition for any of the co-ops of this area.
So in
This era.
yes, in Manhattan, in what were dense tenement districts, that was eminent domain. But at Co-op City and in Rochdale Village, amalgamated Warbass houses in Queens and the Bronx and Brooklyn, that land was either Starrett City was a landfill, Rochdale Village was a landfill, Co-op City was a field, and then it was a amusement park, Freedom Land. But so different. But in Manhattan, it was mostly it was taken up the Penn South. Yeah.
Hence,
Yes, yes.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry.
Trudy? Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm gonna go back.
Okay, we're going back. Okay.
I
Trudy?
was just
Yeah.
curious if you have any stories or and have read anything about Jessor going back to visit the building he said he built. Because that would be kind of interesting to
I would love to know that. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, but his originally after World War II, his offices was on the building that was demolished to make way for Zuccotti Park. But then when Seward Park was built, he relocated his office to Seward Park, and so he was, he was going to work there every day. But I don't know what if he was frequenting Penn South. I'd love to know about that. Yeah, it's okay. That's a great question.
Yes,
Get answer to what was here before. These were not all poor people on this site.
Carol, I'm
That site
sorry,
had
I'm not
many
leaving.
people.
I said, excuse me.
Could you hang up the phone?
Can you repeat?
please hold.
We couldn't hear
Could you
because she
repeat?
was on
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
There were many people who, I lived here, I lived in Elliott houses at the time.
Ah.
When this was being built. And there were many people who lived on the site who you would consider middle-class people. They were considered good rent-controlled buildings. There were also tenements mixed in. Certain streets, like 27th Street, had more tenements. But this was not a neighborhood you could never knock down today. And there is an article which I'm sure, I know that we have in the archives here, which goes through the whole history of Jessor building this. And he said, never again would they build something like Penn South. It would not be possible to clear land like that. And so they never would attempt land
Something of this scale.
like this. And it was not all a slum. In fact, for those of us who lived in Elliott House, Fulton wasn't yet built, we thought that this was really an area that was more upscale. So there were poor people, but it was not a public. You had manufacturers, people were starting the surf shops, the flower district, and there were many people who were not poor. I still don't understand how they got all the land, but I'm very glad. And the other thing about in the same article about Herman Jessor, he mentions that he put in windows in almost all the apartments, not all, almost all, in the bathrooms and kitchens. And if you go in any luxury buildings today, there are rarely windows in the bathroom or kitchens because that was an expensive thing to do. And I think that was his trade-off against making the buildings beautiful. The thing that he didn't do, and that they didn't do in projects either at the time, is they never put stores on the bottom of the buildings. So as a result, at night, things were very, very dark. And in, not so much in Penn South, but in other buildings, the tower in the park, you have violence and crime because you didn't have an infrastructure.
The life.
To remain
Thank you. Anybody have on it? Yes, I'm going to go back and forth. So, the lady, kind of,
I just had a question about the churches in Penn South. How did
can you be loud so that everybody should hear
I was just wondering about the churches in Penn South. Were they prescribed that they must remain and that was the deal? And that it had to be built around them? Because we have, 1, 2, 3 churches in our campus?
Yeah.
Right? Four? Okay. So it's kind of a lot.
Yeah. I don't know how that happened, but do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, when that was a stipulation.
Okay, we can't hear that.
Can't hear you. Yes, it was a stipulation.
Yeah, that's what we said.
Should be a rarity.
All right, well, yes, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering if, I mean, it seems that as a co-op, Pet South is doing pretty good. But how is like the physical and financial health of the other ones?
Yeah. So Co-op City's doing good. All of the co-ops on Grand Street when they went private in the 1990s. The Amalgamated Clothing Workers houses in the Bronx, they declared bankruptcy before World War II. Sholem Aleichem houses, private, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Amalgamated houses in the Bronx, still co-ops, limited equity co-ops. Yeah. Yeah, but it's so different. But the coops in the Bronx they were declared a New York City landmark in the 1980s, but the management company that owns the place is not keeping it up, and it's really sad. So, yeah.
Yes. Yes. And then, yes.
Just wanted to certainly
Zio, please.
stand up for Gina Jacobs for one thing, and also to just make the point and ask you this on the fact that a lot of times historic preservation is made in opposition to decent housing, and that has sort of been played a lot in New York City, and the city of Yes is, you know, a gift to developers and all this stuff like that. And, you know, Penn South is an example of livable housing with green space, light, and air that people seem to think can never be done again. And it's, you know, I just thought I would run that by you.
Yeah, I love Jane Jacobs. Brilliant urbanist. I think it's interesting, though, I think that a lot of the antagonism and this idea that we can't do anything, I think people really distort Jane Jacobs' writing because people use her text in a way to say that it foments a lot of sort of anti-government investment in housing. Like the way that she's used and distorted, I think, is really wrong. I think that today, if we're going to be serious about this housing crisis, we need to learn from people like Jessor and the UHF. And there were mistakes made. There absolutely were mistakes made, and Jane Jacobs did an amazing job of calling them out and pointing to that history. I just think that now we're in such a mess, we need to think big like they were back then as well. So, yeah.
Yes, the person in the back.
Yeah,
Please, loud, please.
I was wondering if like there was any reason from an architectural standpoint as to why some of the buildings, at least in this complex, are like on the tilt.
Yeah.
Like, is that to allow for more sunlight or to include that greenery?
Solar orientation. That's exactly the reason for the angling. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Other questions? Yes, please.
Was Jessor the person who had the idea of some double buildings and some single buildings?
At Co-op City?
Well, here we have what we
Oh.
call some double buildings like this one. There are 2 elevators, and we have A and B buildings, whereas, you know, building 1, building 10, building 5 are a single building.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are the advantages of that?
Energy efficiency, less space dedicated over for mechanical, electrical, plumbing. That's about consolidating infrastructure.
And land availability.
And land availability, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Knowing everything that you know about New York City housing, and I came in late, so sorry if you covered this, what would you do to solve the housing crisis, and how would you recommend that we?
Yeah.
A few hours.
Yeah, round 2. I think that ideas like the Social Housing Development Authority are really good ones. So that's a really clear-cut solution that I would like to see happen at the state level.
What is?
I'd also like to see more not-for-profit developers, like the United Housing Foundation. The system we have now, de Blasio passed mandatory inclusionary housing, MIH, which basically means you build 100 units, you have to have 30% of them being affordable. But the reason that's not working is because what determines affordability is the area median income. And the way that the region of New York is defined, it includes Westchester, it includes parts of Connecticut, so that elevates the AMI. And so that's just not working. And so I think that there needs to be, I think the trades need to get back into building housing. The unions need to get back into building housing. And I think the Social Housing Development Authority needs to happen. And I guess what we can do in this room is, I know that the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is working on a project at Penn South now. I think that's wonderful. I'd like to see more of that happen at more of these buildings all over the city. So,
Yes, we're involved in it.
yeah. So that's really inspiring.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Can I ask you a two-part question? The first part will be quick. Do you know whether any of the people who are displaced in the construction of Penn South are given any kind of priority for getting police in Penn South? And that's like, yeah. And do you have any insight about the apparent lack of basements at Penn South?
As like a design flaw? Or like storage space, or?
It seems to be collapsing, but it's unusual for them to be building in New York City with that basement.
The question there.
Yeah, about basements. I guess. Well, like how do you define basement? Do you mean like storage space or?
Street
level.
Oh.
Again, you have a driver's handbook.
Yeah, I haven't seen it myself. I don't know, but I'm not sure.
Down, the elevator goes down, one more. What's down there? I don't know. It's something that may not be so much, but the elevator's all going down below Flynn's Park.
What is that? Yeah, but that's only where the elevators are. So we wonder.
Well, we can't go down there, but.
Any other questions? Yes.
This isn't a question, but I do want to tell people that the Penn South, that PSSS has the Penn South Archive project. And on our website, we have a number of documents from the United Housing Foundation. And check it out. Just go to PSSS.org and look up the archive project.
Yes, thank you.
We have many items there that relate to.
One of the items is the original quote-unquote slum clearance report that was Moses's and other people's justification for getting the land. And it's really interesting. And we have, as Trudy just said, we have pictures from lots of people. We have documents of people's original floor plans.
Yeah.
We have oral histories where people like Pauline and Susan Immergut, people who know the whole history in their heads.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, this one. So now these buildings, right? What was it their intended usable life? So, right, you raised the question of green maples and buildings, right? It's arguable that Penn South cost is caught in right? During good things like what it's a big. I mean, it's a challenge now. Anything that's built with future.
Yeah.
Like that's a whole other challenge in and of itself. Like, what's the solution here?
The lifetime of the yeah.
But we didn't hear the question.
It was about how long were these buildings designed to last for, and we're talking about 40,000 units all over the city. So every single development is different. As far as the Penn South's design, I don't know that. I don't know, but that's a really good question. Yeah.
That's just
Yeah, are there any questions? I'm sorry. Yes, Ruth.
Do you have any comments on what's happening with our neighbors in NYCHA?
Yeah.
Over at Belly and Fulton, which seems pretty sad from our perspective.
I'm in touch with Selena's Miranda, Renee, Luana Green, who now lives up. Yeah, I mean I'm in touch with folks there all the time. So NYCHA and HUD has just issued its final environmental impact statement. Related would have you think that it's a done deal. I know that Luis Flores from, I forget the name of his advocacy group, but they just filed a lawsuit. So they're suing.
good.
And so I don't know, we don't know how that will go, but I think that should buy more time at least. But I know right now that the first building that they're trying to tear down is predominantly where seniors live, and the new sort of private police force that Related has brought in to police the place. I know they're harassing people. I've been in touch with folks who are saying that, they'll come home and somebody will be in front of their door and saying, are you planning on moving yet? And it sounds really, really, really bad.
Really?
Yeah, it's awful.
It is awful. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Listen, can you drop it? Yes.
A question about the viability of just affordability, just in relation to like city, state regulations. We had a finance meeting here, I think, a little while back, and one of the things that struck me was just very sharply increased costs just due to city, state regulations. That seems reasonable. But they're adding up to just a very sharp increase in costs. So I wonder what you could speak about the relation of those two factors.
So rising costs for maintenance and
city-imposed regulations, state-imposed
regulations,
environmental, other factors.
Sure. Yeah. So new regulations are getting passed all the time. Like you need a certain kind of glazing. That's a lot of architects are talking about how that's. I don't have an answer, but there's a precedent that I think is really interesting to think about. In Paris, there's a great architecture office called Le Coton Vessal, and they have pioneered the movement to retrofit buildings just like this. So what that means is reskinning them, upgrading the facades so they're more energy efficient. It's a real problem, but as far as what's happening in architecture right now, there's not enough thinking about how to maintain these places. So it's a design problem that's yet to be solved is my answer.
And then how do we relate that to keeping costs down?
Yeah.
To keep things affordable?
Yeah.
All that.
It's all that's a huge design problem. Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, I have no answers on that front, but I know that the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is investing money in that.
Yes.
Trying to figure out the answer to that question.
I think so. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Do you know if there's any relation between Abraham Kazin and the writer Alfred Kazin? And do you know of any buildings by Jessor, noteworthy buildings outside of his cooperative housing work?
So, Alfred Kazin, I don't know that writer.
Okay.
I don't think there's a connection. We have an interview with Kazin's stepdaughter, Sandra Kazin, who still lives at Penn South, if you look on the archive site. And I think we asked her that question, and I don't think there's a connection.
Okay. But then other buildings, yeah. So his last office was in Seward Park, and so he still has drawings in the basement. And the last time we were there, we found a drawing set he did for a teeny tiny single family house in rural Washington D.C. I don't know who the client was. I don't know anything about it. I can't find the address, but. He also, I believe, worked on a bowling alley in around Elecchester. But yeah, so we come across things like that all the time. Like, oh yeah, he also designed when he was just out of school before Shalem Elechem houses. He did some stuff he did 940 and 960 Grand Concourse. Really beautiful Art Deco buildings. Did a lot of art Grand Concourse work. Also some stuff on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. Yeah, but so we're still trying to. It's like an archaeology project of trying to figure out this whole knot.
Yeah. Yes, Tracy.
Yes. Yeah. So coming back, was Herman Jessor blacklisted? And the answer was yes. My friend and I have applied for Herman's FBI records, which we should have in 2026. But who knows if we'll get those now. But he was blacklisted, and I have no empirical evidence to support this, but I would say the reason we know so little about him is because he was blacklisted. There's no other thing that I can think of aside from somebody so prolific who built so much, who influenced so many people's lives. Yeah.
So you'll come back and do a talk after you get the.
Yeah. Then we'll go through the record. Yeah. Yeah.
didn't mean it.
Oh,
you taking it twice.
Yeah.
You know, I live in South, and that's a little different. I know how hard they were, they're making up to mission speed and everything. No, I'm very concerned about the city of Yes.
Yeah.
And the destruction to our neighbors in public housing over here. I wonder how much the idea of infill, you know, on the campus, is an issue, and how other co-ops throughout the city have been dealing with this whole city of Yes issue of infill, which means putting buildings in our lovely open spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, so right, I know another place where that's happening. There's a Mitchell-Lama campus in the Bronx in Soundview called Stevenson Commons. There's an infill project happening right now. I think City of Yes poses humongous problems.
Yeah.
It's giving the developers keys to the city.
Because I feel like every time we need funds, they'll say, well, just build an extra building, you know, you have extra space.
And that's how,
We'll make
yeah.
money there.
And that's how it started at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea houses. The developers in 2019 came to them and said, we're just gonna do one building on a parking lot. Then they did their feasibility study and they said, you know what? All of these buildings are gonna crumble in the next 30 years. We gotta tear the whole place down. But it was this, they let the devil into the back door basically with that infill. And
We'll be aware now, right? Yeah.
that's it's really insidious. How it works is they'll say we're just going to do a little tiny building on that corner, on that parking lot. You won't even notice that we're here. And then once you let them into the door, they'll say, oh, you know what? We took a look at the bones of the other buildings. We're starting to see some real problems with them. And then it's that's how it happens again and again and again.
I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Daniel for the fabulous.